Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Transcript. I'm your host, JT, and I'm here. You ever have just one of those days where you're just happy to be where you're at? Anyways, much needed. Why, hello, and hello to you too. Hopefully, we get a few more people coming in tonight. We have been talking court cases for a while. We do a lot of dissection of things. We've talked about transcripts, obviously. I mean, that's the name of the show. Um, I kind of wanted to get a little meta today and go into, like, let's talk about crime itself. I am interested in, criminal investigative analysis. And so what I thought I'd do was go into the FBI vault and pull. They have like a 7-part PDF um, of some of their documentation on this. Tonight, depending on where we go and where we get to, uh, we're going to talk specifically on criminal profiling as a viable investigative tool against violent crime, criminal profiling from crime scene analysis, offender profiles, a multidisciplinary approach, and a psychological assessment of crime or profiling. So we're going to talk about some pretty cool stuff tonight. I think. I mean, I find it interesting. So, and we're going to be doing a little bit of manipulating of the document as we go, simply because, well, they decided that 2 columns were a good idea. So here we are, right? Okay. So let's go ahead and open up the right view. There you go. All right. So I will zoom in so everybody can see, of course. But this is Criminal Profiling, a Viable Investigative Tool Against Violent Crime. And this is by John Douglas, who at the time was Special Agent Program Manager for Profiling and Consultation Program, and Alan Burgess as well. And so there's a lot of good stuff in this, as hopefully we find. I am going to zoom in on this column and hopefully make. I would love to make that disappear, but I don't think I'm going to be able to. Let's see. Show hide. Well, I don't appreciate that. Silence is fascinating. I know. Yeah, we'll work around it. We can do that. Oh, it went away. Hey, look at that. Ta-da! All right. So, before we do that, I wanted to show you that I got some stuff in the mail. I decided to give this company a go. Look at that card. How great, huh? Colors are awesome. Anyways, I'm very excited about that. I'm excited to start handing those suckers out because you all and that is the way that we get the word out. So here we go. All right. Assuming that will go away. Quickly apprehending a perpetrator of a violent crime, rape, homicide, child abduction, is a major goal of all law enforcement agencies. Unlike other disciplines concerned with human violence, law enforcement does not, as a primary objective, seek to explain the actions of a violent offender. Instead, its task is to ascertain. Where was I? Wow, good start, JT. Its task is to ascertain the identity of the offender based on what is known of his actions. Described by one author as an emitter of signals during commission of a crime, the criminal must be identified as quickly as possible to prevent further violence. While studies um, explaining why certain individuals commit violent crimes may aid them in their search, law enforcement investigators must adapt the study findings to suit their own particular needs. Criminal profiling is a tool law enforcement may use to combine the results of studies in other disciplines with more traditional techniques in an effort to combat violent crime. The profiling process. A lot of people go with profiling and they're like, witchcraft, it's crazy. And like from the get go, this was just a tool to add to kind of enhance what they were already doing. So the profiling process is defined by the FBI as an investigative technique by which to identify the major personality and behavioral characteristics of the offender based upon an analysis of the crime or crimes he or she has committed. The process generally involves 7 steps, and we will find those steps up above. 1. Evaluation of the criminal act itself. 2. Comprehensive evaluation of the specifics of the crime scene or scenes. 3. Comprehensive analysis of the victim. 4. Evaluation of preliminary police reports. 5. Evaluation of the medical examiner's autopsy protocol. 6. Development of profile with critical offender characteristics. And 7. Investigative suggestions predicated on construction of the profile. The process used by the person preparing a criminal personality profile is quite similar to that used by clinicians to make a diagnosis and treatment plan. Data is collected and assessed, the situation reconstructed, hypotheses are formulated, a profile developed and tested, and the results reported back. Criminal personality profiling has been used by law enforcement with success in many areas and is viewed as a way in which the investigating officer can narrow the scope of an investigation. Profiling, unfortunately, does not provide the identity of the offender, but it does indicate the type of person most likely to have committed the crime, having certain unique characteristics. Oh, look, it's Mr. Douglas himself. Okay. There we go. All right. One area in which criminal profiling personality assessment has been useful is in hostage negotiation. Law enforcement officers need to learn as much as possible about the hostage taker in order to protect the lives of the hostages. They must be able to assess the subject in terms of his probable course of action and his reactions to various stimuli. In such cases, police obtain information about the offender through verbal contact with the hostage taker and possibly through access to his family and associates. Criminal profiling techniques have also been used in identifying who anonymous letter writers and persons who make written or spoken threats of violence. In cases of the latter, psycholinguistic techniques have been used to compose a threat dictionary, whereby every word in a message is assigned by computer to a specific category. Words as they are used in the messages are then compared to those words as they are used in ordinary speech or writings. And the vocabulary usage of a particular author or speaker may yield signature words unique to that individual. In this way, police may not only be able to determine that several letters were written by the same individual, but also learn about the background and psychology of the offender. Rapists and arsonists also lend themselves to criminal profiling techniques. Through careful interview of the rape victim about the rapist's behavior, law enforcement personnel may be able to build a profile of the offender. The theory behind this approach is that behaviors, sexual, physical, verbal, reflects personality. And by examining the behavior of the rapist during the assault, the investigator may be able to determine what type of person is responsible for the offense. Common characteristics of arsonists have been derived from an analysis of the uniform crime reports. Knowledge of the arsonist's psychodynamics can aid the investigator in identifying possible suspects, predicting location of subsequent arsons, and developing techniques and strategies for interviewing suspects. Criminal profiling has been useful in investigating sexual homicides because many of these crimes appear motiveless and thus offer few obvious clues about the killer's identity. In murders that result from jealousy or a family quarrel or take place during commission of a felony, the readily identifiable motive generally provides vital information about the identity of the killer. Because many sexual homicides fail to provide this information, investigators must look to the methods that supplement conventional investigative techniques to identify the perpetrator. Case in point, criminal profiling uses the behavioral characteristics of the offender as its basis. Sexual homicides, for example, yield much information about the mind and motivation of the killer. A new dimension is provided to the investigator via the profiling technique, particularly in cases where the underlying motivation for the crime may be suddenly hidden from even the more, where are you? Document. Even the more experienced detective. Oh, that's not fun. I can't move it over. That's not true. Make that work. Nope, that's about it. Okay. The following case will illustrate this point. During the fall of 1982, an urban Midwest Police Department detective telephonically contacted the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy, asking for some assistance. The detective described in detail the rape murder of a 25-year-old white married woman. The detective advised that the apartment where the victim was killed had been ransacked, but they were unable to determine at that time if anything was taken by the killer. In view of the fact that many leads were still outstanding and information concerning the autopsy, laboratory examinations, background of the victim, previously reported neighborhood crimes, etc., was still pending, the detective was advised that a profile could not be provided at that time. After approximately 1 week, the detective forwarded the necessary information to the local FBI field office criminal profile coordinator. After reviewing the case for completeness, the profile coordinator forwarded the materials to the Behavioral Science Investigative Support Unit at the FBI Academy for analysis. Color 8x10 crime scene photographs recreated the crime and revealed that the victim was killed in her living room with no evidence of any struggle or defense attempts by her. The victim was lying face up on the living room floor. Her dress was raised up over her hips, exposing her genital area. And her panties were pulled down to her knees. The murder weapon, a hammer, belonging to the victim, was found in the kitchen sink, and it appeared that the victim's blood had been washed off the hammer by the subject. Crime scene photographs further revealed that the subject opened dresser drawers and closet doors. Investigative reports indicated the victim's husband advised that jewelry belonging to the victim was missing. The victim and her husband had lived in the apartment for approximately 6 months, and neighbors and associates reported they were friendly and quiet and kept to themselves. The medical examiner concluded in his where are you? Words. Protocol that there was no apparent indication that the victim was sexually assaulted. Laboratory reports indicated that the victim had been drinking at the time of the assault, and there was no evidence of semen present in or on the victim or her clothing. From the above information, the criminal profiler advised the detective that he had already interviewed the killer. The surprised detective was presented with the following probable crime scenario. The victim was drinking with the offender prior to her death. An argument ensued, reaching a threshold where the offender could not take it any longer. Angered, He obtained a weapon of opportunity from the kitchen cabinet and returned to the living room where he confronted the victim face to face and repeatedly struck the victim about her head and face. After killing her, the offender realized that the police would surely implicate him as the obvious murderer. He then washed blood from his hands in the kitchen sink and also cleaned blood and fingerprints from the hammer. He rolled the victim over in a face up position and staged the crime to appear the way he felt a sexually motivated crime should look. He conducted the staging by making it appear that the offender searched for money or personal property in the apartment. Upon hearing this analysis of the crime, the detective exclaimed, "You just told me the husband did it." The detective was coached regarding suggested re-interview techniques of the victim's husband. In addition, the detective was further advised that if the victim's husband were given a polygraph examination, he in all probability would react more strongly to the known fact that he was soiled by his wife's blood than to questions concerning his wife's murder. The detective was told to have the polygraph examiner direct questions at the husband, acknowledging the fact that he got blood on his hands and washed them off along with the hammer in the kitchen sink. About 5 days later, the detective called the criminal profiler to advise that the victim's husband was charged with murder. According to the detective, the husband failed the polygraph and subsequently admitted his guilt to the polygraph examiner. Witchcraft. The FBI's profiling the FBI's profiling program has grown considerably since the late 1970s, from informal analysis and profiling during criminal psychology classes at the FBI Academy to the present formalized program. Currently, the program consists of one program manager and 7 criminal profilers and crime analysts. These agents were selected primarily for their investigative experience, expertise, and educational backgrounds. The Behavioral Science Investigative Support Unit has found that anyone seeking transfer into this highly specialized program must possess, above all other attributes and accomplishments, a strong investigative background that includes participating in, supervising, and managing major case assignments. During 1985, the Criminal Profiling and Consultation Program received over 600 requests for profiling assistance. It is anticipated that once the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, is fully operational, this is from 1990, the number of profiling requests will nearly double annually. Oh, I think that it's probably done more than that. One key link to the success of the FBI's criminal profiling program is its criminal profile coordinators, who are located at every one of the FBI's 59 field offices. These highly trained and selected agents are responsible for screening cases and for providing preliminary investigative suggestions to investigators. While the field coordinators do not have the authority to provide profiles to requesting law enforcement agencies, they are authorized to prepare preliminary rough draft profiles, which are reviewed by the profiling staff at the FBI Academy prior to being disseminated to the requesting agency. Criminal profiling is available to local, state, federal, and foreign law enforcement agencies or departments. It should be noted that not every violent crime matter lends itself to the profiling process. The criminal profile coordinators in the FBI field offices determine during review of the case whether it can be profiled. However, while a case may not be suitable for profiling, the coordinator may still submit it to the behavioral science unit for other types of services. Criminal profilers at the FBI Academy may assist the law enforcement community by providing interrogation techniques, investigative suggestions and techniques, establish probable cause for search warrants as a result of National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, violent offender research findings, assist prosecutors relative to prosecutive strategies, and possibly provide testimony as a witness for the prosecution or as an expert witness during the sentence phase of the trial. All cases must be submitted to the local FBI field office for review and administrative handling by that criminal profile coordinator. Lieutenant Commander Vernon J. Gabarth of the New York City Police Department wrote in his book, Practical Homicide Investigation, Tactics, Procedures, and Forensic Techniques, quote, "This program has proven to be beneficial to law enforcement and has provided homicide detectives with a viable investigative tool. Criminal profiling will never take the place of a thorough and well-planned investigation, nor will it ever eliminate the seasoned, highly trained, and skilled detective. Criminal profiling has, however, developed itself to a level what? To a level. There it is. Where the detective has another investigative weapon available to him in solving a violent crime. The offender, on the other hand, has an added worry that in time he will be identified, indicated, successfully prosecuted, and sentenced for his crime." So there's your opening of that. Let's see here. Let's see. This looks a little more standard. I'll go that route. Okay. All right. So this is by John Douglas, Robert Ressler, Ann Burgess, and Carol Hartman. Crime profiling from crime scene analysis. Since the 1970s, investigative profilers at the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit, now part of the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, have been assisting local, state, and federal agencies in narrowing investigations by providing criminal personality profiles. An attempt is now being made to describe this criminal profiling generating process. A series of 5 overlapping stages lead to the 6th stage, or the goal of apprehension of the offender. 1. Profile inputs. 2. Decision process models. 3. Crime assessment. 4. The criminal profile. 5. Investigation. And 6. Apprehension. 2 key feedback filters in the process are A. Achieving congruence with the evidence, with decision models, and with investigation recommendations, and B. The addition of new evidence. And then there's a quote here. "You wanted to mock yourself at me. You did not know your French name. I know that name too. He thrust out his chest and twirled his mustache. I looked at him and grinned. All right, then, I said, give us the answer to the problems if you know it. But of course I know it." This is from, so the report itself is from 1990. This is from 1986, just to give you guys a time frame. Hey, look, that is a whole quote from a book. Man, that is not easy to read. All right. The ability to solve a crime. That Discord link isn't working. Of course it's not. One moment. That one should work. All right. The ability of Porritt to solve a crime by describing the perpetrator is a skill shared by the expert investigative profiler. Evidence speaks its own language of patterns and sequences that can reveal the offender's behavioral characteristics. Like Poirot, I think that's Poirot, the profiler can say, I know who he must be. This article focuses on the developing technique of criminal profiling. Special agents at the FBI Academy have demonstrated expertise in crime scene analysis of various violent crimes, particularly those involving sexual homicide. This article discusses the history of profiling and the criminal profiling generating process. and provides a case example to illustrate the technique. Criminal profiling has been used successfully by law enforcement in several areas and is a valued means by which to narrow the field of investigation. Profiling does not provide the specific identity of the offender. Rather, it indicates the kind of person most likely to have committed the crime by focusing on certain behavioral and personality characteristics. Profiling techniques have been used in various settings, such as hostage taking. Law enforcement officers need to learn as much as possible about the hostage taker in order to protect the lives of the hostages. In such cases, police are aided by verbal contact although often limited, with the offender and possibly by access to his family and friends. They must be able to assess the subject in terms of what course of action he is likely to take and what his reactions to various stimuli might be. Profiling has been used to identify anonymous letter writers and persons who make written or spoken threats of violence. In cases of the latter, psycholinguistic techniques have been used to compose a threat dictionary. We've spoken on this. We've also read about that as well. Is this the same? No, it can't be. Hold on. All right. The profiling of murderers. Traditionally, two very different disciplines have used the technique of profiling murderers. Mental health clinicians who seek to explain the personality and actions of a criminal through psychiatric concepts, and law enforcement agents whose task it is to determine the behavioral patterns of a suspect through investigative concepts. In 1957, that's too far. In 1957, the identification of George Metesky, the arsonist in New York City's Mad Bomber case, which spanned 16 years, was aided by psychiatrist criminologist James A. Brussels' staccato-style profile. Look for a heavy man, middle-aged, foreign-born, Roman Catholic, single, lives with a brother or sister. When you find him, chances are he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit, buttoned. You all might have heard of this before. Indeed, the portrait was extraordinary in that the only variation was that Metesky lived with two single sisters. Brussels, in a discussion about the psychiatrist acting as Sherlock Holmes, explains that a psychiatrist usually studies a person and makes some reasonable predictions about how that person may react to a specific situation and about what he or she may do in the future. What is done in profiling, according to Brussels, is to reverse this process. Instead, by studying an individual's deeds, one deduces what kind of a person the individual might be. The idea of constructing a verbal picture of a murderer using psychological terms is not new. In 1960, Palmer published results of a 3-year study of 51 murderers who were serving sentences in New England. Palmer's typical murderer was 23 years old when he committed the murder. Using a gun, this typical killer murdered a male stranger during an argument. He came from a low social class and achieved little in terms of education or occupation. He had a well-meaning but maladjusted mother, and he experienced physical abuse and psychological frustrations during his childhood. Similarly, Rizzo in 1982 studied 31 accused murderers during the course of routine referrals for psychiatric examination at a court clinic. His profile of the average murderer listed the offender as a 26-year-old male who most likely knew his victim, with monetary gain the most profitable motivation for the crime. Through the techniques used today, law enforcement seeks to do more than describe the typical murderer. If in fact there ever was such a person, investigative profilers analyze information gathered from the crime scene for what it may reveal about the type of person who committed the crime. Law enforcement has had some outstanding investigators. However, their skills, knowledge, and thought processes have rarely been captured in the professional literature. These people were truly the experts of the law enforcement field, and their skills have been so admired that many fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, I don't remember how I said it was, Mike Hammer, and Charlie Chan, have been modeled on them. Although Lund, 1976, has stated that the murders of fiction bear no resemblance to the murders of reality, a connection between fictional detective techniques and modern criminal profiling methods may indeed exist. For example, it is attention to detail that is the hallmark of famous fictional detectives. The smallest item at a crime scene does not escape their attention. As stated by Sergeant Cuff in Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone, widely acknowledged as the first full-length detective story, at one end of the inquiry, there was a murder. And the other end, there was a spot of ink on the tablecloth that nobody could account for. In all my experience, I've never met with such a thing as a trifle yet. However, unlike detective fiction, real cases are not solved by one tiny clue, but the analysis of all clues and crime patterns. Criminal profiling has been described as a collection of leads, as an educated attempt to provide specific information about a certain type of suspect, and as a biographical sketch of behavioral patterns, trends, and tendencies. Gabert has also described the profiling process as particularly useful when the criminal has demonstrated some form of psychopathology. As used by the FBI profilers, the criminal profile generating process is defined as a technique for identifying the major personality and behavioral characteristics of an individual based upon an analysis of the crimes he or she has committed. The profiler's skill is in recognizing the crime scene dynamics that link various criminal personality types who commit similar crimes. The process used by an investigative profiler in developing a criminal profile is quite similar to that used by clinicians to make a diagnosis and treatment plan. Data are collected and assessed. The situation reconstructed, hypotheses formulated, a profile developed and tested, and the results reported back. Investigators traditionally have learned profiling through brainstorming, intuition, and educated guesswork. Their expertise is the result of years of accumulated wisdom, extensive experience in the field, and familiarity with a large number of cases. A profiler brings to the investigation the ability to make hypothetical formulations based on his or her previous experience. A formulation is defined here as a concept that organizes, explains, or makes investigative sense out of information and that influences the profile hypotheses. These formulations are based on clusters of information emerging from the crime scene data and from the investigator's experience in understanding criminal actions. A basic premise of criminal profiling is that the way a person thinks, for example, his or her patterns of thinking, or for instance, directs the person's behavior. Thus, when the investigative profiler analyzes the crime scene and notes certain critical factors, he or she may be able to determine the motive and type of person who committed the crime. Investigative profilers at the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, now part of the NCAVC, have been analyzing crime scenes and generating criminal profiles since the 1970s. Our description of the construction of profiles represents the off-site procedure as it is conducted at the NCAVC, as contrasted with an on-site procedure. The criminal profile generating process is described as having 5 main stages, with the 6th stage or goal being the apprehension of a suspect. So number 1, the profiling input stage. The profiling input stage begins the criminal profiling generating process. Comprehensive case materials are essential for accurate profiling. In homicide cases, the required information includes a complete synopsis of the crime and a description of the crime scene, encompassing factors indigenous to that area, to the time of the incident, such as weather conditions and the political and social environment. Complete background information on the victim is also vital in homicide profiles. The data should cover domestic setting, employment, reputation, habits, fears, physical condition, personality, criminal history, family relationships, hobbies, and social conduct. Forensic information pertaining to the crime is also critical to the profiling process, including an autopsy report with toxicology, serology results, autopsy photographs, and photographs of the cleansed wounds. The report should also contain the medical examiner's findings and impressions regarding estimated time and cause of death, type of weapon, and suspected sequence of delivery of wounds. In addition to autopsy photographs, aerial photographs, if available and appropriate, and 8x10 color pictures of the crime scene are needed. This is like their writer. If you want us to work on this, give us all brown M&Ms. Also useful are crime scene sketches showing distances, directions, and scale, as well as maps of the area, which may cross law enforcement jurisdiction boundaries. The profiler studies all the, I'm just thinking about this. I know this was 86 and I'm sure they still need this stuff. But if the FBI came in to solve Delphi, do you think they gave them all of it? I don't think they had all this stuff. That's an assumption on my part, but just don't think so. The profiler studies all this background and evidence information, as well as all initial police reports. The data and photographs can reveal such significant elements as the level of risk of the victim, the degree of control exhibited by the offender, and the offender's emotional state and his criminal sophistication. Information the profiler does not want included in the case materials is that dealing with possible suspects. Such information may subconsciously prejudice the profiler and cause him or her to prepare a profile matching the suspect. Don't give them the answer. Number 2, the decision process model stage. The decision process begins the organizing and arranging of the inputs into meaningful patterns. 7 key decision points or models differentiate and, oh, great, cool. Let's see if they actually describe them in the text. Yep. Differentiate and organize the information from stage 1 and form an underlying decisional structure for profiling. So, homicide type and style. As noted in Table 1, homicides are classified by type and style. A single homicide is 1 victim, 1 homicidal event. Double homicide is 2 victims, 1 event, and in 1 location. And a triple homicide has 3 victims in 1 location during 1 event. Anything beyond 3 victims is classified a mass murder. That is 4 or more victims in 1 location and within 1 event. There are 2 types of mass murder, classic and family. A classic mass murder involves 1 person operating in 1 location at 1 period of time. That period of time could be minutes or hours and might even be days. The classic mass murderer is usually described as a mentally disordered individual whose problems have increased to the point that he acts against groups of people unrelated to these problems. He unleashes his hostility through shootings or stabbings. One classic mass murderer was Charles Whitman, the man who armed himself with boxes of ammunition, weapons, ropes, and radio and food, barricaded himself in a tower in Austin, Texas, and opened fire for 90 minutes, killing 16 people and wounding over 30 others. He was stopped only when he was killed during an assault on the tower. James Huberty was another classic mass murderer. With a machine gun, he entered a fast food restaurant and killed and wounded many people. He also was killed at the site by responding police. More recently, 1986, Pennsylvania mass murderer Sylvia Segrist, nicknamed Miss Rambo for her military-style clothing, was sentenced to life imprisonment for opening fire with a rifle at shoppers in a mall in October of 1985, killing 3 and wounding 7. The second type of mass murder is family member murder. If more than 3 family members are killed and the perpetrator takes his own life, it is classified as a mass murder-suicide. Without the suicide and with 4 or more victims, the murder is called a family killing. Examples include John List, an insurance salesman who killed his entire family on November 9th, 1972, in Westfield, New Jersey. The bodies of List's wife and 3 children, ages 16, 15, and 13, were discovered in their front room, lying side by side on top of sleeping bags, as if in a mortuary. Their faces were covered and their arms were folded across their bodies. Each had been shot once behind the left ear, except one son who had been shot multiple times. A further search of the residence discovered the body of List's mother in a third-floor closet. She had also been shot once behind the left ear. List disappeared after the crime, and his car was found at an airport parking lot. In another family killing case, where was I? William Bradford Bishop beat to death his wife, mother, and 3 children in the family's Bethesda, Maryland residence in March of 1976. He then transported them to North Carolina in the family station wagon, where their bodies, along with the family dogs, were buried in a shallow grave. Bishop was under psychiatric care and had been prescribed antidepressant medication. No motive was determined. Bishop was a promising mid-level diplomat who had served in many overseas jobs and was scheduled for higher-level office in the U.S. Department of State. Bishop, like List, is a federal fugitive. There is strong indication both crimes were carefully planned, and it is uncertain whether or not the men have committed suicide. And now I want to see if they have been caught. William Bradford Bishop. Let's see. Nope. Still hasn't been. Multiple sightings, maybe, but nope. And then the other fellow was... Sorry, I forgot his name already. John List. Doesn't that make sense? So the other one's still a fugitive. John List is dead. He was found. He got life. Was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder. Hey, but he got on TV. He was part of America's Most Wanted. Good for him. You all probably already knew that. 2 additional types of multiple murder are spree and serial. A spree murder involves killings at 2 or more locations with no emotional cooling off time period between murders. Just desserts, yes. The killings are all the result of a single event, which can be of short or long duration. On September 6, 1949, Camden, New Jersey, spree murderer Howard Unruh took a loaded German Luger with extra ammunition and randomly fired the handgun while walking through his neighborhood, killing 13 people and wounding 3 in about 20 minutes. Even though his killings took such a short amount of time, they are not classified as a mass murder because he moved to different locations. Serial murderers are involved in 3 or more separate events, with an emotional cooling off period between homicides. This type of killer usually premeditates his crimes, often fantasizing and planning the murder in every aspect, with the possible exception of the specific victim. Then, when the time is right for him and he is cooled off from his last homicide, he selects his next victim and proceeds with his plan. The cool-off period can be days, weeks, or months, and is the main element that separates the serial killer from other multiple killers. However, there are other differences between the murderers. The classic mass murderer and the spree murderer are not concerned with who their victims are. They will kill anyone who comes in contact with them. In contrast, a serial murderer usually selects a type of victim. He thinks he will never be caught, and sometimes he's right. A serial murderer controls the events, whereas a spree murderer who oftentimes has been identified and is being closely pursued by law enforcement may barely control what will happen next. The serial killer is planning, picking and choosing, and sometimes stopping the act of murder. We all remember BTK. A serial murderer may commit a spree of murders. In 1984, Christopher Wilder, an Australian born businessman and race car driver, traveled across the United States killing young women. He would target victims at shopping malls or would abduct them after meeting them through a beauty contest setting or dating service. While a fugitive was a serial murderer, Wilder was investigated, identified, and tracked by the FBI and almost every police department in the country. He then went on a long-term killing spree throughout the country and eventually was killed during a shootout with police. Wilder's classification changed from serial to spree because of the multiple murders and the lack of a cooling off period during his elongated murder event, lasting nearly 7 weeks. This transition has been noted in other serial spree murder cases. The tension due to his fugitive status and the high visibility of his crimes gives the murderer a sense of desperation. His acts are now open and public, and the increased pressure usually means no cooling off period. He knows he will be caught, and the coming confrontation with police becomes an element in his crimes. He may place himself in a situation where he forces the police to kill him. It is important to classify homicides correctly. For example, a single homicide is committed in a city. A week later, a second single homicide is committed, and the third week, a third single homicide. 3 seemingly unrelated homicides are reported, but by the time there is a fourth, there's a tie-in through forensic evidence and analyses of the crime scenes. These 3 single homicides now point to one serial offender. It is not mass murder because of the multiple locations and cooling off periods. The correct classification assists in profiling and directs the investigation as serial homicides. Similarly, profiling of a single murder may indicate the offender had killed before or would repeat the crime in the future. In some cases, murder may be an ancillary action and not itself the primary intent of the offender. The killer's primary intent could be criminal enterprise, emotional, selfish, or cause-specific, or sexual. The killer may be acting on his own or as part of a group. When the primary intent is criminal enterprise, the killer may be involved in the business of crime as his livelihood. Sometimes murder becomes part of this business, even though there is no personal malice towards the victim. The primary motive is money. In the 1950s, a young man placed a bomb in his mother's suitcase that was loaded aboard a commercial aircraft. The aircraft exploded, killing 44 people. The young man's motive had been to collect money from the travel insurance he had taken out on his mother prior to the flight. Criminal enterprise killings involving a group include contract murders, gang murders, competition murders, and political murders. When the primary intent involves emotional, selfish, or cause-specific reasons, the murderer may kill in self-defense or compassion, mercy killings where life support systems are disconnected. Family disputes or violence may lie behind infanticide, matricide, patricide, and spouse and sibling killings. Paranoid reactions may also result in murder, as the previously described Whitman case. The mentally disordered murderer may commit a symbolic crime or have a psychotic outburst. Assassinations, such as those committed by Sirhan Sirhan and Mark Chapman, also fall into the emotional intent category. Murders in this category involving groups are committed for a variety of reasons. Religious, Jim Jones and Jonestown, Guyana case, cults, Charles Manson, and fanatical organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan and the Black Panther Party of the 1970s. Finally, the murderer may have sexual motives for killing. Individuals may kill as a result of or to engage in sexual activity, dismemberment, mutilation, evisceration, or other activities that have sexual meaning only for the offender. Occasionally, 2 or more murderers commit these homicides together, as in the 1984-85 case in Calaveras County, California, where Leonard Lake and Charles Ng are suspected of as many as 25 sex torture slayings. I think that was the toy box, right? No? No. I am incorrect. Interesting. You'd think I know this stuff already. La la la. Victim risk. The concept of victim's risk is involved at several stages of the profiling process and provides information about the suspect in terms of how he or she operates. Risk is determined using such factors as age, occupation, lifestyle, physical stature, resistance ability, and location of the victim, and is classified as high, moderate, or low. Killers seek high risk victims at locations where people may be vulnerable, such as bus depots or isolated areas. Low risk types include those whose occupations and daily lifestyle do not lead them to being targeted as victims. The information on victim risk helps to generate an image of the type of perpetrator being sought. And that's victimology, right? I'd say that since 1986, that's probably been pushed even more. Data on victim risk integrates with information on offender risk, or the risk the offender was taking to commit the crime. For example, abducting a woman at noon from a busy street is high risk. Thus, a low risk victim snatched under high risk circumstances generates ideas about the offender, such as personal stresses he is operating under, his beliefs that he will not be apprehended, or the excitement he needs in the commission of the crime, or his emotional maturity. Information about escalation is derived from an analysis of facts and patterns from the prior decision process models. Investigative profilers are able to deduce the sequence of acts committed during the crime. From the deduction, they may be able to make determinations about the potential of the criminal not only to escalate his crimes, from peeping to fondling to assault to rape to murder, but to repeat his crimes in serial fashion. One case example is David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, who started his criminal acts with the non-fatal stabbing of a teenage girl and who escalated to the subsequent .44 caliber killings. There are several time factors that need to be considered in generating a criminal profile. These factors include the length of time required, Oh, hey, we made it through the first section. Hold on, I gotta get the second one. I didn't. Oops. We did it for now. At this moment in time. Let's get back up there. Time factors. That's what we're talking about. Time factors. You decided not to download it. Fascinating. Well, let's go back. Yeah, it's a big old cliffhanger, isn't it? Cliffhanger! Yeah, there you are, you punk. Nope. Hey, I bet that got... Nope, there you are. Okay. That's not going to help anybody. What did I have that under the last time? It was read mode. Yeah, there you go. Okay. All right. That's not correct. That is correct. Okay. So time. 2, to commit additional acts with the body, and 3, to dispose of the body. The time of day or night that the crime was committed is also important, as it may provide information on the lifestyle and occupation of the suspect, and also relates to the offender risk factor. For example, the longer an offender stays with his victim, the more likely it is that he will be apprehended at the crime scene. In the case of the New York murder of Kitty Genovese, the killer carried on his murderous assault to the point where many people heard or witnessed the crime, leading to his eventual prosecution. A killer who intends to spend time with his victims, therefore, must select a location to preclude observation, or one with which he is familiar. Information about location, where the victim was first approached, where the crime occurred, and the crime and death scenes differ. And if the crime or death scenes differ, provide yet additional data about the offender. For example, such information provides details about whether the murderer used a vehicle to transport the victim from the death scene, or if the victim died at her point of abduction. In terms of the crime scene assessment stage, the crime assessment stage in generating a criminal profile involves the reconstruction of the sequence of events and the behavior of both the offender and victim. Based on the various decisions of the previous stage, this reconstruction of how things happened, how people behaved, and how they planned and organized the encounter provides information about specific characteristics to be generated for the criminal profile. Assessments are made about the classification of the crime, its organized, disorganized aspects, the offender's selection of a victim, strategies used to control the victim, the sequence of crime, the staging or not of the crime, the offender's motivation for the crime, and crime scene dynamics. The classification of the crime is determined through the decision process outlined in the first decision process model. The classification of the crime as organized or disorganized, first introduced as classification of lust murder, but since broadly expanded, includes factors such as victim selection, strategies to control the victim, and sequence of the crime. An organized murderer is one who appears to plan his murders, target his victims, and display control at the crime scene. And act out a violent fantasy against the victim, sex, dismemberment, torture. For example, Ted Bundy's planning, oh boy, was noted through his successful abduction of young women from highly visible areas, beaches, campuses, ski lodge. He selected victims who were young, attractive, and similar in appearance. His control of the victim was initially through clever manipulation and later physical force. These dynamics were important in the development of a desired fantasy victim. In contrast, the disorganized murderer is less apt to plan his crime in detail, obtains victims by chance, and behaves haphazardly during the crime. For example, Herbert Mullen of Santa Cruz, California, who killed 14 people of varying types, elderly man, young girl, a priest, over a 4-month period, did not display any specific planning or targeting of victims. Rather, the victims were people who happened across his path, and their killings were based on psychotic impulses as well as on fantasy. And that seems scarier than anything else. It reminds me of Art the Clown from Terrifier. The determination of whether or not the crime was staged, if the subject was truly careless or disorganized, or if he made the crime appear that way to distract or mislead police, helps direct the investigative profiler to the killer's motivation. In one case, a 16-year-old high school junior living in a small town failed to return home from school. Police, responding to the father's report of his missing daughter, began their investigation and located the victim's scattered clothing in a remote area outside the town. A crude map was also found at the scene, which seemingly implied a premeditated plan of kidnapping. Boy, you missed that second P in kidnapping, didn't you, John? The police followed the map to a location which indicated a body may have been disposed following the map to a disposed of in a nearby river. Written and telephoned extortion demands were sent to the father, a bank executive, for the sum of $80,000, indicating that a kidnap was the basis of the abduction. The demands warned police in detail not to use electronic monitoring devices during their investigative efforts. Was this crime staged? The question was answered in two ways. The details in one aspect of the crime, scattered clothing, tire tracks, indicated that subject was purposely staging a crime, while the details in the other, extortion, um, led the profilers to speculate who the subject was, specifically that he had a law enforcement background and therefore had knowledge of police procedures concerning crimes of kidnapping, hiding the primary intent of sexual assault and possible murder. With this information, the investigative profilers recommended that communication continue between the suspect and the police, with the hypothesis that the behavior would escalate and the subject become bolder. While further communications with the family were being monitored, profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit theorized that the subject of the case was a white male who was single, in his late 20s to early 30s, unemployed, and who had been employed as a law enforcement officer within the past year. He would be a macho outdoors type person who drove a late model, well maintained vehicle with a CB radio. The car would have the overall appearance of a police vehicle. As the profile was developed by the FBI, continued to monitor the extortion telephone calls made to the family by the subject. The investigation, based on the profile, narrowed to two local men, both of whom were former police officers. One suspect was eliminated, but the FBI became very interested in the other since he fit the general profile it previously developed. This individual was placed under surveillance. He turned out to be a single white male who was previously employed locally as a police officer. He was now unemployed and drove a car consistent with the FBI profile. He was observed making a call from a telephone booth, and after hanging up, he taped a note under the telephone. The call was traced to the residence of the victim's family. The caller had given instructions for the family to proceed to the phone booth the suspect had been observed in. The instructions will be taped there, stated the caller. The body of the victim was actually found a considerable distance from the staged crime scene, and the extortion calls were a diversion to intentionally lead the police investigation away from the sexually motivated crime of rape murder. The subject never intended to collect the ransom money, but he felt that the diversion would throw the police off and take him from the focus of the rape murder inquiry. The subject was subsequently arrested and convicted of this crime. Yep. Motivation is a difficult factor to judge. You want a name? Hold on. I'm looking. Hmm. I can't find it right now. I have to. I have to. Yeah, the person writing. Yeah, John Douglas. John Douglas. He absolutely should have. Let me do this though. Um, let me see if I can add a note of sorts. Nope, that's not it. There we go. Got it. Got it. Well, they have been name dropping all over the place. What I'm wondering is, I'm wondering if it's in the back. Um, it's in the back in the notes, so we can check that if I remember when we get to that point, or I'll research it and let you know in the courtyard in one of the chats. Motivation is a difficult factor to judge because it requires dealing with the inner thoughts and behavior of the offender. Motivation is more easily determined in the organized offender who premeditates, plans, and has the ability to carry out a plan of action that is logical and complete. On the other hand, the disorganized offender carries out his crimes by motivations that are frequently are derived from mental illnesses and accompanying distorted thinking resulting from delusions and hallucinations. Drugs and alcohol, as well as panic and stress resulting from disruptions during the execution of the crime, are factors which must be considered in the overall assessment of the crime scene. Crime scene dynamics are the numerous elements common to every crime scene, which must be interpreted by investigative officers and are at times easily misunderstood. Examples include location of crime scene, cause of death, method of killing, position of body, excessive trauma, and location of wounds. The investigative profiler reads the dynamics of a crime scene and interprets them based on his experience with similar cases where the outcome is known. Extensive research by the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy and in-depth interviews with incarcerated felons who have committed such crimes have provided a vast body of knowledge of common threads that link crime scene dynamics in specific criminal personality patterns. For example, a common error of some police investigators is to assess a particularly brutal lust mutilation murder as the work of a sex fiend and to direct the investigation towards known sex offenders when such crimes are commonly perpetrated by youthful individuals with no criminal record, which is terrifying. Hopefully everybody's learning something here. I'm sure you knew a chunk of this stuff, but seeing it put together is nice. Not nice, but you know what I mean. The fourth stage in generated criminal profile deals with the type of person who committed the crime and that individual's behavioral organization within relation to the crime. Once this description is generated, the strategy of investigation can be formulated, as this strategy requires a basic understanding of how an individual will respond to a variety of investigative efforts. Included in the criminal profile are background information or demographics, physical characteristics, habits, beliefs, and values, pre-offense behavior leading to the crime, and post-offense behavior. It may also include investigative recommendations for interrogating or interviewing, identifying, and apprehending the offender. This fourth stage has an important means of validating the criminal profile. Feedback number one: the profile must fit with earlier reconstruction of the crime, with the evidence, and with the key decision process models. In addition, the investigative procedure developed from the recommendations must make sense in terms of the expected response patterns of the offender. If there is a lack of congruence, the investigative profilers review all available data. As Hercule Poirot, why do they have to use, you know what, forget it, observed, to know is to have all of the evidence and facts fit into place. Once the congruence of the criminal profile is determined, a written report is provided to the requesting agency and added to its ongoing investigative efforts. The investigative recommendations generated in stage 4 are applied, and suspects Perot, like Perot. French words have a way of making your mouth go, "What the hell are you trying to do to me?" Yeah, well, yeah. Listen, I respect Agatha Christie. Phenomenal. But couldn't he be called Smith? Uh Okay. If identification, apprehension, and confession result, the goal of the profile effort has been met. If new evidence is generated by another murder and or there are no identification of a suspect, there is no identification of a suspect. Yeah, Smythe. Why not Smythe? Smith? Smythe. It's a good reference. Reevaluation occurs via feedback number 2. The information is re-examined and the profile revalidated. Once a suspect is apprehended, the agreement between the outcome and the various stages in the profile generating process are examined. When an apprehended suspect admits guilt, it is important to conduct a detailed interview to check the total profiling process for validity. Case. Everybody. I know you're interested. A young woman's nude body was discovered at 3:00 p.m. on the roof landing of the apartment building where she lived. She had been badly beaten about the face and strangled with the strap of her purse. Um, Her nipples had been cut off after death and placed on her chest. Scrawled in ink on the inside of her thigh was, "You can't stop me." The words "fuck you" were scrawled on her abdomen. A pendant in the form of a Jewish sign, Kai, which she usually wore as a good luck piece around her neck, was missing and presumed taken by the murderer. Her underpants had been pulled over her face. Her nylons were removed and very loosely tied around her wrists and ankles near the railing. The murderer had placed symmetrically on either side of the victim's head the pierced earrings she had been wearing. An umbrella and ink pen had been forced into her, and a hair comb was placed in her pubic hair. The woman's jaw had and nose had been broken. Um, well, I don't know what it is yet. Hopefully, they'll tell us. And her molars loosened. This is vaguely familiar to me, though. She suffered multiple face fractures caused by a blunt force. Cause of death was asphyxia by ligature, pocketbook strangulation. There were post-mortem bite marks on the victim's thighs, as well as contusions, hemorrhages, and lacerations to the body. The killer also defecated on the roof landing and covered it with the victim's clothing. The following discussion of this case is the context of the 6 stages of the criminal profile generating process, illustrates how this process works. I can't find it right off the bat. I'll have to figure this out. I'll figure it. I'll figure that one out too. They might say it at the end. Who knows? All right. In terms of crime scene evidence, everything the offender used at the crime scene belonged to the victim. Even the comb and the felt tip pen used to write on her body came from her purse. The offender apparently did not plan this crime. He had no gun, ropes, or tape for the victim's mouth. He probably did not even plan to encounter her that morning at that location. The crime scene indicated a spontaneous event. In other words, the killer did not stalk or wait for the victim. The crime scene differs from the death scene. The initial abduction was on the stairwell, then the victim was taken into a more remote area. Investigation of the victim revealed that the 26-year-old, 90-pound, 4-foot, 11-inch white female woke around 6:30 a.m. She dressed, had a breakfast of coffee and juice, and left her apartment for work at a nearby daycare center, where she was employed as a group teacher for handicapped children. She resided with her mother and father. When she would leave for work in the morning, she would take the elevator or walk down the stairs, depending on her mood. The victim was a quiet young woman who had a slight curvature of the spine. I think it's kyphoscoliosis. Why does this sound like the Richmond Strangler dude? The forensic information in the medical examiner's report was important in determining the extent of the wounds, as well as how the victim was assaulted and whether evidence of sexual assault was present or absent. No semen was noted, but semen was found on the body. It appeared that the murderer stood directly over the victim and masturbated. There were visible bite marks on the victim's thighs and knee area. Um, you can read that next sentence. I'm trying not to get canceled by YouTube. Whatever. You know what? This is a case, obviously. Cause of death was strangulation, first manual, then ligature with the strap of her purse. The fact that the murderer used a weapon of opportunity indicates that he did not prepare to commit this crime. He probably used his fist to render her unconscious, which may be. Just tell us to read it. Okay, I'll just tell you to read it. Which may be the reason no one heard any screams. There were no deep stab wounds, and the knife used to mutilate the victim's breast apparently was not big, probably a penknife that the offender normally carried. The killer used the victim's belts to tie her right arm and right leg, but he apparently untied them in order to position the body before he left. The preliminary police report revealed that another resident of the apartment building, a white male aged 15, discovered the victim's wallet in the stairwell between the third and fourth floors at approximately 8:20 a.m. He retained the wallet until he returned home from school for lunch that afternoon. At the time, he gave the wallet to his father, a white male aged 40. The father went to the victim's apartment at 2:50 p.m. and gave the wallet to the victim's mother. When the mother called the daycare center to inform her daughter about the wallet, she learned that her daughter had not appeared for work that morning. The mother, the victim's sister, and a neighbor began to search of the building, and they discovered the body. Oh my God. The neighbor called the police. Police at the scene found no witnesses who saw the victim after she left her apartment that morning. That's terrible. I need 1 second just to recover. That went left. I didn't expect it to go like that. I, I can't even imagine. That's why I recognize it. I recognize this case because it was in the book Mindhunter. It was Francine Elvison. My goodness gracious. I'm trying to find. I'm trying to figure out if they figured this out. Yep. Okay. All right. So they did solve this. So that's good, right? Control F. No, because then I lose my spot. So it was Francine Elvison. That's Francine Elveson, and I will I'll tell you more about it in a little bit. The crime style is a single homicide with the victim's primary and the murderer's primary intent making it a sexually motivated type of crime. There was a degree of planning indicated by the organization and sophistication of the crime scene. The idea of murder had probably occupied the killer for a long period of time. The sexual fantasies may have started through the use and collecting of sadistic pornography depicting torture and violent sexual acts. Victim risk assessment revealed that the victim was known to be very self-conscious about her physical handicap and size, and she was a plain-looking woman who did not date. She led a reclusive life and was not the type of victim that would or could fight an assailant or scream and yell. She would be easily dominated and controlled, particularly in view of her small stature. Based upon the information or occupation for violent crimes, the apartment building was part of a 23 building public housing project in which the racial mixture of residents was 50% black, 40% white, and 10% Hispanic. It was located in the confines of a major police precinct. There had been no other similar crimes reported in the victims or nearby complexes. The crime was considered very high risk for the offender. He committed the crime in broad daylight, and there was a possibility that other people who were up early might see him. There was no set pattern of the victim taking the stairway or the elevator. It appeared that the victim happened across the path of the offender. There was no escalation factor present in the crime scene. The time for the crime was considerable. The amount of time the murderer spent with his victim increased his risk of being apprehended. All his activities with the victim, removing her earrings, masturbating over her, took a substantial amount of time. The location of the crime suggested that the offender felt comfortable in the area. He had been here before, and he felt that no one would interrupt the murder. The crime scene indicated the murder was one event, not one of a series of events. It also appeared to be a first-time killing, and the subject was not a typical organized offender. There were elements of both disorganization and organization. The offender might fall into a mixed category. A reconstruction of the crime death scene provides an overall picture of the crime. To begin with, the victim was not necessarily stalked, but instead confronted. What was her reaction? Did she recognize her assailant, fight him off, or try to get away? The subject had to kill her to carry out his sexually violent fantasies. The murderer was on known territory and thus had a reason to be there at 6:30 in the morning. Either he resided there or he was employed at this particular complex. The killer's control of the victim was through the use of blunt force trauma, with the blow to her face, the first indication of his intention. It is probable that the victim was selected because she posed little or no threat to the offender. Because she didn't fight, run, or scream, it appears that she did not perceive her abductor as a threat. Either she knew him, had seen him before, or he looked non-threatening. He was dressed as a janitor, a postman, a businessman, and therefore his presence in the apartment would not alarm his victim. In the sequence of the crime, the killer first rendered the victim unconscious and possibly dead. He could easily pick her up because of her small size. He took her up to the roof landing and had time to manipulate her body while she was unconscious. He positioned the body, undressed her, acted out certain fantasies, which led to masturbation. The killer took his time at the scene, and he probably knew that no one would come to the roof and disturb him in the early morning, since he was familiar with the area and had been there many times in the past. The crime scene was not staged. Sadistic, ritualistic fantasy generated the sexual motivation for murder. The murderer displayed total domination of the victim. In addition, he placed the victim in a degrading posture, which reflected his lack of remorse about the killing. The crime scene dynamics of the covering of the killer's feces and the positioning of the body are incongruent and need to be interpreted. First, as previously described, the scene was opportunistic. The crime scene portrayed the intricacies of a long-standing murderous fantasy. Once the killer had a victim, he had a set plan about killing and abusing the body. However, within the context of the crime, the profilers note a paradox: the covered feces. Defecation was not part of the ritual fantasy, and thus it was covered. The presence of the feces also supports the length of time taken for the crime, the control the murderer had over the victim, her unconscious state, and the knowledge he would not be interrupted. The positioning of the victim suggested the offender was acting out something he had seen before, perhaps in a fantasy or in a sadomasochistic pornographic magazine. Because the victim was unconscious, the killer did not need to tie her hands. Yet he continued to tie her neck and strangle her. He positioned her earrings in a ritualistic manner, and um, he wrote on her body. This reflects some sort of imagery that he probably had repeated over and over in his mind. He took her necklace as a souvenir, perhaps to carry around in his pocket. The investigative profilers noted that the body was positioned in the form of the woman's missing Jewish symbol. Let's see how much. Okay, we're going to do criminal profile and call it a night, and we'll continue on after that. Based on the information derived during the previous stages, a criminal profile of the murderer was generated. First, a physical description of the suspect stated that he would be a white male between 25 and 35 of the same general age as the victim and of average appearance. The murderer would not look out of context in the area. He would be of average intelligence and would be a high school or college dropout. He would not have a military history and may be unemployed. His occupation would be blue collar or skilled. Alcohol or drugs did not assume a major role as the crime occurred in the early morning. The suspect would have difficulty maintaining any kind of personal relationships with women. If he dated, he would date women younger than himself, as he would have to be able to dominate and control in the relationship. He would be sexually inexperienced, sexually inadequate, and never married. He would have a pornography collection. The subject would have sadistic tendencies. The umbrella and the masturbation act are clearly acts of sexual substitution. The sexual acts showed controlled aggression, but rage or hatred of women was obviously present. The murderer was not reacting to rejection from women as much as to morbid curiosity. In addressing the habits of the murderer, the profile revealed there would be a reason for the killer to be at the crime scene at 6:30 in the morning. He could be employed in the apartment complex, be in the complex on business, or reside in the complex. Although the offender might have preferred his victim conscious, he had to render her unconscious because he did not want to get caught. He did not want the woman screaming for help. The murderer's infliction of sexual sadistic acts on an inanimate body suggests he was disorganized. He probably would be a very confused person, possibly with previous mental problems, if he carried out such acts on a living victim. He would have a different type of personality. The fact that he inflicted acts on a dead or unconscious person indicated his inability to function with a live or conscious person. The crime scene reflected that the killer felt justified in his actions and that he felt no remorse. He was not subtle. He left the victim in a provocative, humiliating position exactly the way he wanted her to be found. He challenged the police in his message written on the victim. The messages also indicated that the suspect might well kill again. And with that, my friends, I say cliffhanger. So the next bits here are the investigation and apprehension. And you know what? Let's finish this. We are almost done. Brink. The crime scene received intense coverage by the local media because it was such an extraordinary homicide. The local police responded to a radio call of a homicide. They in turn notified the Detective Bureau, which notified the Forensic Crime Scene Unit, Medical Examiner's Office, and the County District Attorney's Office. A task force was immediately assembled of approximately 26 detectives and supervisors. An intensive investigation resulted, which included speaking to and interviewing over 2,000 people. Somebody let Delphi know that's how you do it. Records checks of known sex offenders in the area proved fruitless. Handwriting samples were taken of possible suspects to compare with the writing on the body. Mental hospitals in the area were checked for people who might fit the profile of this type killer. The FBI's behavioral science unit was contacted to complete a profile. In the profile, the investigation recommendation included that the offender knew the police sooner or later would contact him because he either worked or lived in the building. The killer would somehow inject himself into the investigation, and although he might appear cooperative to the extreme, he would really be seeking information. In addition, he might try to contact the victim's family. The outcome of the investigation was apprehension of a suspect 13 months following the discovery of the victim's body. After receiving the criminal profile, police reviewed their files of 22 suspects they had interviewed. One man stood out. This suspect's father lived down the hall in the same apartment building as the victim. Police originally had interviewed his father, who told them his son was a patient at the local psychiatric hospital. Police learned later that the son had been absent without permission from the hospital the day and evening prior to the murder. They also learned he was an unemployed actor who lived alone. His mother had died of a stroke when he was 19 years old, 11 years previous. He had had academic problems of repeating a grade and dropped out of school. He was a white 30-year-old who also was an ex-prize fighter. The suspect reportedly had his arm in a cast at the time of the crime. A search of his room revealed a pornography collection. He had never been in the military, had no girlfriends, and was described as being insecure with women. The man suffered from depression and was receiving psychiatric treatment and hospitalization. He had a history of repeated suicidal attempts, hanging, asphyxiation, both before and after the offense. The suspect was tried, found guilty, and is serving a sentence from 25 years to life for this mutilation murder. He denies committing the murder and states he did not know the victim. Police proved that security was lax at the psychiatric hospital in which the suspect was confined, and that he could literally come and go as he pleased. However, the most conclusive evidence against him at his trial were his teeth impressions. 3 separate forensic dentists, prominent in their field, conducted independent tests and all agreed that the suspect's teeth impressions matched the bite marks found on the victim's body. Criminal personality profiling has proven to be a useful tool to law enforcement in solving violent, apparently motiveless crimes. The process has aided significantly in the solution of many cases over the past decade. It is believed that though the research efforts of personnel in the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime and professionals in other fields, the profiling process will continue to be refined and be a viable investigative aid to law enforcement. So, what's the next part here? Let's see if we can figure this out. Wow, that just kind of skips right over, doesn't it? Oh, no, there's okay. So now, well, it does skip, but now they're talking about it looks like the formulation of the BAU. So, lot to go through. Huh? I found it interesting. I don't know if everybody else did. Yeah, I think they are. It seems like they are. I mean, this was written in 1986, and that crime was in 1979. If you're looking for something a little more specific in regards to that case, that'll get you there. And it looks like that also discusses what John did, what he could tell about the attack, who they ended up finding, and it talks more about the teeth bites and things like that. So you might be interested to read a little bit more on that there. It's this this stuff's always very interesting to me. This is why I got into true crime, is the whole behavioral analysis stuff. The fact that we can boil down actions, behaviors, not perfectly, of course, but boil them down ultimately, because we are not as different as we think we are. But yeah, you want to read a Delphi one, like a Delphi what? Behavioral analysis piece, or or um, what specifically? Because we did the Odin thing, but we can always go back and take a look at the ridiculousness. Because wowzers. ISP. Oh, oh, written up for Indiana State. Oh, got it, got it, got it. I'm taking a look for it right now, but I don't think I will find it. Well, listen, if anybody wants to go looking for it, definitely do that. You can always send us an email. I'm JT at tcwtmedia.com. You got Tara at tcwtmedia.com. Terry will be confused why you send it to her, but you can send it to her and she'll forward it to me. Terry at tcwtmedia.com. If you end up getting your hands on it, definitely let us know. Again, if you have any suggestions for documents or things that you're interested in, even if you haven't found the documents and you can't attach them, just send us your suggestions for things that you're interested in, because I'd much rather read things that you're interested in and that you have kind of like a part of this, you have kind of a part of the show. And so that's super helpful. So you can email us at any of those locations and let us know kind of what you'd like to see, whether it be trials, different cases, different sciences, things like that. Just let us know. It's really helpful, because then we're doing things that you want to have seen, read, heard, found, etc. We have a pretty cool. Our staff's pretty good at finding things, if they can. So legally. So thanks everybody for tuning in tonight to the Transcript. We will be back next week, same time. On Friday, we've got the Hey Ho Show, and that is at 9 p.m. Eastern. So be there. We look forward to it every single time, and we hope you do too. And we're just there to make you laugh, because good grief, the world needs some laughing. So we will see you on Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, everybody. Please, please, please take care of yourselves, your friends, your family, your community. Don't let anybody dull your sparkle. And shine on, you crazy diamonds. Shine on. I'll see you on Friday.